Have you spent any time thinking about this weird quality of the laws of physics, that there's no mathematical distinction in the laws between forward in time and backward in time? Is that something you're familiar with?
Perceiving time as having direction is a false perception. Time or events don't follow a direction, but rather the logical order of cause and effect. To illustrate, take counting for example, because time is a number system and counting them is an event. Say counting 1 to 24 like the hours in a day is perceived as counting forward, but it can also be described as going up in number. Now that's two directions to describe the same process because literally there is no direction, just a logical order. In far and Middle Eastern countries, where writing is done right to left as opposed to our left to right, time's forward direction there is also perceived as right to left as opposed to our left to right. Direction with regard to events should only be meant figuratively, like when someone is making forward strides in their progress or taking backward steps. What then is time? It's been defined as what the clock measures. A very simple and effective argument against this definition is, if we don't know what time is, then how do we know clocks measure it? What clocks do actually measure is duration. Now, you may be thinking that duration is time, so therefore clocks do measure time, but duration isn't actually time because originally it wasn't a temporal term, but rather an event-related one, as duration comes from the Latin durare, meaning to harden, which is a process of an event. Some other terms that are now regarded as temporal, but were originally event-related are moment, past and future, and also interval, which was originally a spatial term, but is now also a temporal one. Question begs, what happened in history that caused this change from the original meaning of these terms? That would have been the invention of the clock, because these terms went from being event-related words to time-related ones, and clocks are instruments of time. Saying instruments of time doesn't mean the invention for tracking the day and year, although in saying that, being that these instruments of time are an invention, it does render time to being just an invention. This change from the original meaning is very telling, because actual discoveries don't cause terminologies to change in meaning, which implies that time is an illusion. Something worthy of consideration is the implication that exists if special relativity is factual, because it would mean that thousands of years ago someone put a stick in the ground to track the passage of the day and inadvertently accessed the fourth dimension. Time, or chronos, was coined in ancient Greece in 700 BCE, with the abstract sense in mind, after people started experiencing the passage of the clock and calendar's units as being representative of not only the degrees of Earth's spinning in orbit, but also representative of something at a fundamental level, which led to an addition being made to these devices' job description, when people started experiencing this abstract sense of what would come to be known as time passing. Something worthy of note is that there was a god of time formed, also called Cronus, who was described as a destructive, all-devouring force, which is how time is still perceived today. There is also a god of time named Zurvan. With regard to this god, there is no distinction between good and evil, which brings to mind how time can be a destructive force, but it can also heal old wounds. This seems to indicate that time's origin may have been somewhat religiously motivated. If you think also about how close this sense of time passing is to the passage of the day and year, it's just the passage of the day and year with the progress of their phases from morning to morning and spring to spring being converted into time units. This creates an effect that makes us perceive the passage of the day and year as the passage of time. In the world of magical illusions, to accomplish an illusion, what's required are props and misdirection. Misdirection is where attention is drawn to one thing to take it away from something else. This is done to obscure the method and mechanics of the trick. With the illusion of time passing, the units of measurement provide the misdirection because the focus is on the passing of the units, which takes attention away from what the units actually represent, which is the passing of the day and year. Basically, the rotations are the props which create the passing effect, and the units of measurement create the misdirection for the time effect. This is a result of fusing technology, the clock and calendar, with nature, Earth's rotations. This caused our perceptions to change because before this invention we lived on a planet that's in a solar system. But since then we've also been living on a clock that's in a calendar, having our daily and yearly passages been explained by time units, the effect of which causes us to perceive these daily and yearly passages as the passage of time. You see, Earth's axis rotation happens at 1,000 miles an hour. Our orbit of the Sun is at 64,000 miles per hour, and we don't directly recognize this movement. It's only the Sun's apparent movement that lets us know what's going on with the passage of our daily phases and seasonal changes. The movement that brings about these phases and changes is explained by our invented units, so these units are there to help make sense of our planet's motion. But our wires seem to have got crossed because we perceive what is merely our planet's motion as time's advancement. If you think about it, why is there a need for a fourth dimension when events unfold in three-dimensional fashion? What is actually responsible for an event's progress are the four fundamental forces of nature, such as gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak and strong nuclear force, because events are causal, and causality is a product of interactions, and these forces of nature are responsible for every interaction in the universe, meaning they're responsible for causality. So, with the four fundamental forces of nature propelling events, and the three dimensions of space accommodating their progress, what's preventing events from occurring that a fourth dimension is required? Earlier we considered the etymology of the word duration. Another word that's worthy of consideration, especially in light of our current discussion, is spell. An example of the word in use would be, he was left waiting for a long spell. The likely reason that time can be referred to as spell is because the long time that someone may be left waiting is unknown, mysterious, and therefore has a magical effect. Spells aren't used in the world of magical illusions. It's a dark arts practice, but people are spellbound by time passing.